Hello and welcome back in. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of our Social Security presentation on maximizing your benefits. Now, in part 1, we focused on the foundation of Social Security in the program. We introduced different concepts that are going to be important to understanding how to make the most of your personalized decision. In part 2, we begin to apply those different concepts that we talked through different examples and case studies so that you really understand the inputs that are involved here. Additionally, we talk about secondary environmental factors in retirement that you have to consider to make sure that you're getting the most out of your benefits in your retirement savings. Without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and we can get into our example. Let's go ahead and meet our married couple, John and Mary. Now, John and Mary, they're both 61 years old and they're still working. So they need to decide when is the right age to retire and when they should take their Social Security benefits. And as we mentioned in the first presentation, this is a very personalized decision. But the goal of this case study is to go through 4 different options that they're considering so that you can understand how these decisions affect the Social Security payouts, how they affect your lifetime benefit, and really how far your savings can go. The goal of this is for you to understand the inputs that we're considering and to be able to apply it to your own situation so you can maximize your benefits. Now, furthermore, we have to consider the right inputs that we need to look at to make an informed decision. So let's go over a few of those. The first of which is, what do our annual expenses look like in retirement? Now, John and Mary think that they're going to need about $80,000 in today's dollars to be able to pay for the expenses in retirement. So how we build out that plan is we start with that $80,000 and then we build a 3% inflation rate on that each year to make sure that we're not losing our purchasing power as we go further along in retirement. The second piece that needs to be considered is, what do our current savings look like? Right now, John and Mary have about $700,000 tucked away. $500,000 of that is in a pre-tax account, and $200,000 of that is an after-tax Roth account. When we talk about withdrawal strategy, we're going to first use the income that we have. So if John and Mary are going to work, we're going to take the money that they earned and be able to pay for that $80,000 worth of expenses. Same with Social Security. Once we switch to that, the money that comes in from Social Security, we're going to first use that to pay our bills. The second area we're going to draw from is that pre-tax account. Since at this point, our Roth won't be taxed for any gains that we have, we're going to let that compound as much as possible so that we really are maximizing our benefits. Then the final input I want to mention on this page is what their full retirement benefit amount is. If they wait until 67, they'll get about $4,500 per month for Social Security, and that's combined between the both of them. Now, in terms of some minor strategy type objectives, we're looking at about a 5% growth for their portfolio that they expect each year. Now, that's relatively conservative, and when you're going into retirement planning, you always want to start on the safe side so you're not left hung out to dry. The final piece that I'll mention before we get into the examples is the different areas we're considering. So for John and Mary, we're looking at retire at 62 and claim at 62. They work another year and then they're done. The second option we're looking at is that they still work another year, but instead of claiming right away, they're going to wait until they're 70 years old to really maximize that benefit. The other 2 examples we're going to look at are, what if they work another year or 2? Now, our first example in that one is, what if they work until they're 63 years old and they wait to claim until they're 70? The second part of our working example is them going until age 64, working until the end of 64 and claiming at 65 right away. So they have no beat missed in terms of the income that they'll be receiving. We're going to now move over to the second part of the considerations for John and Mary. Now, the commonality in this part is the additional years of work for John and Mary. The left-sided figures you see there are if John and Mary were to work through age 63, retire, and then wait until age 70 to actually claim. On the right-hand side, the figures you'll see there are John and Mary working through age 64, and then once they hit 65, they're going to retire and make that claiming decision. Now, the first part of the numbers that jump out to me is in that Social Security income. As you'll see there, when John and Mary claim at 70, they're going to get about $68,000 per year. And that slightly differs from what we saw in the last page. That all ties back to what we discussed in the first part of this series, which was the primary insurance amount. And since John and Mary were able to each work an additional year, they were able to remove one of their lowest 35 years of earnings and replace it with a higher year, which then gave them an additional $1,100 per year in terms of Social Security income. And while that's not major in a one-year sample, over 5-10 years of receiving that compounding interest, it can make a major difference in your retirement portfolio. So another thing just to keep in mind as you're thinking through this. On the right-hand side of this example, we see it at about $48K, which makes sense as a middle figure between that 62 and age 70 claim years that we've quoted. In terms of portfolio withdrawals, you see a similar pattern than what we looked at in the previous slide. We need $86K to sustain those years without income, and then it drops down to $15K per year. Whereas on this side, when we don't miss any sort of check between work and Social Security, we have a steady need of $36,000 each year on top of that $48K we'll be getting from Social Security. Now, in terms of taxes, that's where we see a big jump compared to the previous slide. And the major reason for that is if you are bringing in earned income, that is going to push you into higher brackets at the top end and is going to contribute to more taxes. So I'd say that's the majority of what you see there for total taxes paid. A lot of that is up front. The major difference between that one extra year of work, though, and the difference in claiming strategy is what you see between these two examples. And really what comes of that is John and Mary are taking out $36K from their retirement portfolio each year, which is going to put them in a taxable amount. Whereas once they hit 70 and only need $15K from that retirement income, they're not going to have high tax years at all. Most of the time, they're not even going to need to do a return. So it puts them in a really nice position from that vantage point. What we didn't have to consider on the previous page was the RMD peak. That's because they never had a portfolio large enough in their 70s or 80s where they needed to consider RMDs. But in this one, we are going to have some peak years where we actually are going to have to look at that and make sure that they're withdrawing the correct amount. The good news for these plans for John and Mary are that the peaks of $14K at age 75, which is on our left-sided figures here, and then $18K at age 85, are well within the plans that we already have. Since they're withdrawing $36K, that $18K is already part of the process, as well as that $14K. Even if it's close to that $15K, we're still in good shape because we're under that threshold. So something to look at for your own plan for sure. But in terms of John and Mary's examples, they don't have to worry about RMDs too much. In terms of legacy amount, and again, this is how much is in their retirement accounts, at age 80, we see a pretty big difference there. $594K versus $254. And a primary reason is they were able to have additional year of earnings without having to take from their retirement accounts. That's a big piece. And the second piece is since they never had to make major withdrawals from their retirement accounts in this second part of the plan, they're able to put themselves in a position where they're only taking out $35K. And by the time they hit 80, there hasn't been enough years of that to dramatically decrease the portfolio. Whereas on our left-handed side figures, they were taking out $86K per year, which is really going to dwindle them down. And even if 10 years at only $15K, it still reduced that principal amount quite significantly. On the next two slides, we're going to show you some charts and graphs so that you get a better understanding of how these values work. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the side-by-side comparison. And this table is really just a summation of what we've already been talking through. That being said, there is one row at the bottom that I haven't highlighted on either of the previous slides, and that's when the portfolio fully depletes. What age is that? You can take a look at the rows to see how that works, but I think it's very interesting for the second part of our examples here, when we're working that additional year or two, and then the difference in those claiming strategies. You'll see that the legacy amount, as we talked about on the last slide, is a major difference at 80. Well, what happens in the early 90s actually shows the shift in how these strategies work. So I'll go ahead and move it to the next slide and we can get more into that. Let's now move over to our savings depletion chart. This line chart's really interesting because it's going to show what our retirement accounts are going to look like over time into retirement. And as you can see at the bottom legend here, we have the 4 different strategies that we've considered for John and Mary. You see in orange we have the retire at 62, claim at 62, and you can follow that for each of the different years in retirement to see what those accounts look like before it ultimately hit 0 at age 82. Now, the best performing one is retire at the end of our age 64 year and claim Social Security at 65 right away. This brown line performs very strongly initially. Partly that's because we didn't have 2 years of taking out more money initially because they were working. And on top of that, they were able to let that amount in the retirement accounts compound a little bit and just build up that principal amount. And that principal amount really carries them because they're able to take the compounding interest each year and really just pay for those expenses that they need them to. The problem is over time, you're still going to be slowly losing money. And when you get to a point like they did in their early 80s, where that compounding amount isn't keeping up with how much is being withdrawn, you start to see that portfolio deplete relatively quickly. And over those 10 years from where they were at 530K in their accounts all the way till 92, they burned through the rest of that 530K. Now, the blue line, in which is why I think this example is so interesting, is because their portfolio amount was never close to it once they retired and didn't claim right away. They fell all the way down to about 300K before they even started taking that Social Security check. But what you see once they hit 70 is that that portfolio is going to slowly deplete. Very slowly, much more slowly than our brown line example here. And they actually are going to cross over at age 91 to where the choice of waiting to claim at age 70 would have been a better one had you waited and been able to collect all these years. Now, the retire 64, claim at 65 could be the right strategy for a lot of people. If you have mitigating health factors, if you want to make sure that your heirs are set up, it makes more sense to sometimes claim early and do something with the money you're bringing in. Now, on the other side, if you have a good family history, you're healthy right now, in a lot of those scenarios, it pays to wait to make sure that you have that security at the end of life where you know you're getting the strongest check you could possibly get. Now, as I mentioned at the top of this presentation, there are secondary environmental considerations that you want to make sure you're not turning a blind eye to when you're making your claiming decision and building out a retirement plan. The first of which is the sequence of returns risk. And that's the danger that as you're retiring and beginning to withdraw from your portfolio, that the market drops and you're having to sell losing assets. That's a major issue because you're selling that critical mass that's needed to be able to recover that portfolio when the market eventually goes back up and has an upswing. Now, this is why at AGL Financial, we recommend a bucket strategy. And it's a very simple concept, but you want to have your funds in different areas throughout the markets, throughout the banking services, so that you're in a position that when we do have these market turns, you can sell from assets that aren't losing, and that you're not touching those assets that give you a chance of really high growth and making sure that you're leaving a legacy as well as protecting your own future. Now I'm going to take you through an example that really brings home this concept of sequence of returns risk. Now, we have Investor Blue and Investor Green, and they have the exact same setup. $100,000 in their retirement account. They plan to withdraw $5,000 each year. Now, the difference here lies in how the market reacts when they begin to start withdrawing from those accounts. Investor Blue has positive market returns in the first half of his 15-year cycle. On the second half, he experienced downturns. Whereas Investor Green has the exact opposite scenario. The first half of their retirement, they have negative returns that are dwindling away their assets. And then in the second half, it'll flip to where they'll have the positive returns. And you can actually see this on the chart. For each of the 15 years, it shows a bubble of what that return is on the sheet. So in year 1 for Investor Blue, we have a corresponding exact same value for Investor Green for year 15. Just to show that this is all average and how the math works here. Now when you go through that process, you'll see that Investor Blue comes out way ahead of Investor Green. You can see on the screen it's almost $100,000 difference. And that's because Investor Green had to sell those losing assets in that critical mass in their portfolio. So by the time they started to see the positive returns, that compounding interest was not enough to really catch up to the value that was lost. I have another chart on the next page that's going to show exactly why this phenomenon happens, but that's why it's important that when you have assets, you know how you're arranging them correctly so that if there is market turmoil, you do not have to sell out of assets that are having a bad year or two. This chart is the one that I'm referring to here, and it's why recovering from losses takes longer than you'd imagine. And obviously it's a pretty self-explanatory chart as you can go through and just see the numbers compound in the opposite direction. But the point is that if your portfolio does go down, you need a much higher gain to be able to fully recover it. I mean, we see it in the midpoint of this chart. If you go down 50%, you need to go up 100% just to get back to that principal value. And this is because that principal amount is shrinking and shrinking, and it's taking away how much you're able to compound long term. At AGL Financial, we're here to help. In doing so, we're offering a complimentary consultation of your retirement plan. Now I say complimentary, but that fails to recognize that there's going to need to be some legwork done on your end. Because this is a comprehensive review, we need to understand your asset situation, what expenses look like, even understand prior tax years so that we're giving you the very best recommendations. Now we only do a few of these each month, so if you're interested, you can scan the QR code or head over to our website at aglfinancial.com to fill out a form so that we can get this process started. When we do the consultation, it's going to start with that asset review as I mentioned, and what we do from there is we actually put it through a simulation software that's going to predict hundreds of thousands of potential market outcomes that you could be facing. And what's nice about this is it gives us a range of what that retirement plan looks like, both on the worst case scenario on the low end, but also on the best case scenario on the high end. We also get a most likely, which will give us a guide of where we want to go with the plan. And as much as I love the math and the statistics and numbers for that, that's just the base of our plan. We're going to work together to understand what fits for your needs to make sure that those recommendations are tailored exactly for you. Now we made it to the end of our Social Security presentation, and thank you for watching. Please let us know how we did. We hope that we were able to educate you on this topic. I do want to go over some key takeaways before I let you go though. The first of which, there's no optimal age of claiming Social Security benefits. Now, the system's actually designed to be roughly equal over the course of a lifetime, no matter when you decide to claim. That being said, your health, your family situation, what income looks like, are all going to make your situation truly unique. The Social Security decision is much more than just a monthly check decision. We talked about the modified adjusted gross income. How much earned income in the work that you're doing is going to impact Social Security, your taxes, RMDs, Medicare premiums, survivor benefit needs. All these different things are going to interact with that Social Security decision, and you need a coordinated plan to make sure that you're maximizing what you have. Spousal and survivor benefits do change the math. And while we definitely want to plan for a good scenario of happy days and good health, we also want to mitigate for problem scenarios like the breadwinner's Social Security check ending because they passed away earlier than expected. So you want to have a plan on how you can mitigate those rough edge situations so that you don't run into an issue where your surviving spouse isn't able to maintain retirement. Market risk and withdrawal timing matter. We mentioned this in the sequence of returns risk and how quickly the market can affect how long your longevity is in terms of a retirement account. And finally, a personalized plan is going to give you clarity and confidence. Your situation is unique. Your strategy depends on income sources, taxes, longevity expectations, and what your goals are. So again, please feel free to contact us. AGL Financial is here to help. We thank you again for joining, and we hope to see you soon.